Ezekiel chapters 11 to 20 today, and thankfully this gets a lot less weird than last week, and it seems to be dealing with the theme that there's been a lot of false prophecy going on. We have encountered that idea before, but it's been sort of mentioned in the background sort of thing, but it sounds like this is a rife practice that is causing a lot of problems, and God is going to now go and tackle it. It opens with a proverb that it says that's doing the rounds, not one of the proverbs from the book of Proverbs, just a short saying. The idea being that the days go by and every vision comes to nothing. And God has decided he wants to wipe out this proverb going round. So he's going to change how he's doing things so that is no longer true, because it sounds like that is true. And there are a lot of people saying things that they shouldn't be saying. So he says that all visions are going to be fulfilled. But not only that, they're going to be fulfilled within the lifetime of the current batch of Israelites. So presumably we're suggesting there's no more sort of deep time prophecy, because the Jesus stuff is still 500 years away yet at this point. So it does sound like everything that's going to be prophesied is going to come true quickly. In chapter 14 as well, verse 1, we have this interesting thing where God says, these men have set idols in their hearts. And this goes back to what I was talking about ages ago, when all this talk of false gods and idolatry and that sort of thing. And I'm stuck with that question still. Is this metaphorical gods? So, Molech and Baal and all the rest of it, they're talked about almost as if they actually exist. But if you're thinking them in metaphorical terms, like the love of money could be an idol, then my feeling is that would make a lot more sense, but it's never made explicit. But the way that's stated, idols in their hearts, it could still be, obviously, actual literal idols. When Baal and people think it's a real person or thing, whatever Baal is supposed to be. But again, I think that does tie into the idea that it's this metaphorical idols, as it were. We then have in chapter 14, God references Job, which is really interesting. Because if you recall, back when we covered the book of Job, I was sort of struggling with why is this in the Bible? Because I think it's broadly agreed it is made up. But clearly there was some sort of value in it that it was kept in the Bible. But of course here, God then references Job, only briefly in passing, but it would sort of suggest, okay, that's why the book of Job has to be in the Bible, because otherwise this reference to him would make no sense at all. And I guess you've still got the problem of if the book of Ezekiel is not true, then it doesn't particularly help, kind of. That's the problem with the Job thing, being that someone wrote that and said that God said this and God said that and this was how it would work, but they don't actually know. But this would be God then endorsing that to some extent, at least by referencing Job, and said would seem reasonable that that's an endorsement of the book of Job. So I find that really interesting. Again, it doesn't help obviously because we don't know if Ezekiel is true either, but that's a problem that we kick the can down the road eventually till we get to the resurrection, and we can actually have some historical evidence to tangle with, and in theory then Jesus endorsing it would make a bit more sense. But I thought that was interesting anyway as to why the book of Job would be in there, because it's referenced here. Another quick one just in passing. I'm not going to dwell on this, it's not massively interesting I don't think, but there's a talk of 4 dreadful judgments, and these are sword, famine, wild beast and plague. And it just made me wonder, could that be foundational for the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse? Well, I don't even know where that comes in. I assume it's biblical and coming later on in Revelation perhaps, but just noting that for the record, just in case it's useful later on. There's a lot of talk about prostitution and promiscuity, and this is God talking about Israel in general. I'm never quite sure if I can say that as Israel, because people of Israel and Israelites are different, obviously. But yeah, I'm going to leave it in anyway. And it does make lots of specific reference to nakedness and lustfulness and that sort of thing. So it does seem that this is talking very literally. But it almost sounds like you could characterise the Israelites as this problem, which makes them just sound like a particularly randy bunch. And so I don't really know, but it's an interesting idea. I saw this quote a little while ago. I can't remember who it was for, but it was something along the lines of, if God doesn't punish the world as it stands now, then he's going to have to apologise to Sodom and Gomorrah. And you can sort of see where that's coming from. If people are in trouble for doing all randy things now, then what do you think about now? It's surely, hopefully there's no donkey stuff going on and incest, that sort of thing. But it does seem that what God is not happy with is all the jumping in and out of bed with people shouldn't be doing, which presumably is worse now. I don't know, but It's clearly not a good situation we have here if that's not a good thing. So, yeah, interesting. We also have another reference to sacrificing children to idols. And I've mentioned before that I wonder if, again, idols, is that literally burning them in the fire, or is that metaphorical? A very easy thing to do. I have a teenager. She's always campaigning, can I have social media? No, you can't. But it would be very easy just to say, yeah, here, have a device and go and sit over there quietly while I do what I want to do, which would seem to be the idea of sacrificing her in the fire of social media, something like that. So certainly an interesting idea, and you can see how a lot of that would be happening now. And again, I think it's that theme, a lot in the Bible makes more sense metaphorically than it does literally. Chapter 16, verse 40, I'm going to read actually, and again, I've not heard a knock at the door, so we have to go and find the keeper of the book. And this says, they will bring a mob against you who will stone you and hack you to pieces with their swords. They will burn down your house and inflict punishment on you in sight of many women. I will put a stop to your prostitution and you will no longer pay your lovers. Then my wrath against you will subside and my jealous anger will turn away from you. I will be calm and no longer angry. That also ties into the idea that God states that the Israelites are actually more depraved than a lot of the people they displaced in the Promised Land and that sort of thing. And it's really interesting when you get the Dawkins-Hitchens type thing. They read the thing and they come out with the conclusion that God is awful. Don't get me wrong, there's evidence there. You can see where that's coming from. But they don't seem to pick up on the idea that actually it sounds like the Israelites are one of the worst societies to have ever lived. It's just absolutely mad. They're talking about literally sacrificing their children to false gods, and they're breaking all the rules, despite the theory. They've had all this evidence to show that what's actually true. And I think that's a real problem with the Old Testament, that you can come away from it on a very surface level reading with the idea that God is the baddie. But actually, if you read it properly, it's the Israelites are the baddies. And I guess that in turn becomes interesting, because you think Judaism, this is their Bible, the bit we're reading here at this point. So this they have as sort of part of their claim to being special, as it were. And it's really interesting that it's so bad for their history. I mean, I'm not saying it's the same now. Obviously, this is a definite different time and all the rest of it. But you'd think, as it's about their history, they would want to tweak it, change it, try and make themselves sound a little better. So there seems to be almost some sort of quality in evidence for the fact that it's really terrible, and it sort of suggests it's not being fiddled with. I don't know, it just gives it a whiff of validity or something like that, that it's just such a terrible history that's been preserved. You wouldn't make that up, would you, to try and endorse your society and your God? I'm pretty sure, anyway. In chapter 18, verse 2, there's another proverb that's come from Jeremiah that's doing the rounds, apparently, and God wants to get rid of that. And it says, the parents eat sour grapes and the children's teeth are set on edge, which is a bit weird, but I gather this has something to do with the idea of children being punished for the sins of their parents. And we've already had references to that's kind of been scrapped. Not quite clear why, because earlier on it was punishing to 4 generations or something like that, I think it was. So rewards to 1,000 generations and punishment to 4 generations. And it's clearly a theme now that is no longer a thing. I'm not sure it massively matters, but I mean, it's a horrible idea anyway, isn't it? So actually, it's clearly a good thing that that's gone. It goes on anyway to say that offences will be forgotten due to righteous things people do, which suggests the idea that you can actually earn your way to heaven or whatever. I mean, granted, that's still, it seems to be the case for the Old Testament, that it's good deeds are what measure you out as a good person. But there's this interesting idea that righteous people can fall by behaving badly, and bad people can recover themselves by behaving well. So if you think of that in terms of a net position, so you've started life being terrible and then you've come good. So you might have done lots of terrible things and then some good things. And it sounds like the equation there is you're okay, potentially. Whereas if it's the other way round, and you were good for ages, then you became terrible, whilst your net position, your score for good dumb balance, as it were, might be identical, but because you did them the other way round, it sounds, I could get this wrong, that you can end up worse off despite having the same score as someone who was bad and became good. I'm not sure that would make a lot of sense. So it's quite possible I've got that wrong. And we know it's going to change anyway for the New Testament. But yeah, it's an interesting idea. I guess also hammers that point, doesn't it? That the New Testament is quite different to the Old Testament. And at this point, it's still about you've got to tick the boxes of doing the right thing. Whereas Christianity later on, not so much. God also states here that he takes no pleasure in people's death, which is, well, it's nice to have that stated, isn't it, really? I don't think that has actually been made clear. I mean, he's been made very angry and he's done things and continued doing things. Granted, because the Israelites are deserving of it. That's not in question. But yeah, it's nice to have it in there. Just, oh, by the way, I don't actually like this. Like, great, okay, wonderful. I'm glad we can have that stated. In chapter 20, verse 9, there's a mention of why God got the Israelites out of Egypt. And it was interesting. It was basically... I shall read it, one second. And it says, "But for the sake of my name, I brought them out of Egypt. I did it to keep my name from being profaned in the eyes of the nations among whom they lived, and in whose sight I had revealed myself to the Israelites." So... yeah, that's not quite as I understood it. I thought, chosen people, get them out. And it's but it does seem that it's more about how God appears or something like that. It's quite odd. I mean, it probably makes more sense in the context of the New Testament. And it's not like the Israelites actually were good, which we have had stated. They weren't getting the promised land because they were good. They just, well, best of a bad bunch, I suppose, although potentially that's no longer true. And then finally, I shall read again, in chapter 20, verse 25, God says, "So I gave them other statutes that were not good and laws through which they could not live." Which sounds a little bit like they're set up for a fall, I suppose. Gave them rules knowing full well they couldn't do them, which I assume I've misunderstood that. But, yeah, or maybe he's just saying I gave them laws and it turns out they couldn't live through it. I mean, God would have known, wouldn't he? But they didn't seem like they were ridiculously unreasonable rules. And yeah, I guess just all ties into that big idea and the main theme of the Old Testament, I think, that they're just terrible, terrible people. And this is God trying to figure out how to sort them out. On we shall go anyway. I believe in the next one we should hit what sounds like quite an interesting prophecy about Jesus again. But yeah, so we shall go on and see what that's about.